Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and we really took it up this round when I put Lou Adler's Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke against Kevin Smith's Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And man, this was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make after I've been laughing my ass off for so long. Both of these movies are fucking hilarious and they're very well done, so let's just dive right on into the nitty and the picky. First up, we have Lou Adler's Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke. And of course, the features Cheech and Chong, played by Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong. In the film itself, they're credited. Cheech Marin is credited as Pedro, and Tommy Chong is just credited as Man. Now, in the beginning of the film, the way they introduce these characters are fucking brilliant. We see Cheech Marin on the couch, clearly hung the fuck over, and, you know, not really knowing where the fuck he's at. He's so fucked up that he's pissing in the laundry hamper and putting his clothes in the toilet. That shit is already like, the fucking gags in this film are so subtle sometimes that you gotta watch this film like more than once to fully appreciate like every single like gag that's in there, because a lot of it's not as exaggerated or memorable as like, you know, maybe like the overt stoner shit or like, you know, whatever like parody of whatever thing they're doing and shit. But I think Tommy Chong, though, has an even better introduction, though, because we see his father, played by Strother Martin, who is credited in the film as Mr. Stoner, and his wife is credited as a Tempest Stoner. And they're just, Strother Martin is one of the most, or was one of the most brilliant character actors in not just Westerns, but, you know, 70s cinema in general. You know, you would see him even in, you know, even as early as like the 60s. And, you know, but that whole fucking, if you don't have a job by this afternoon, I'm going to ship you off to military school like the goddamn Finkelstein shit, kid, son of a bitch. Like, that shit is just brilliant. Like, oh, Lord, I think he's the Antichrist, you know. And then they come together. Everything in this movie is done, like, there's not really a plot, so to speak. It's other than just these whacked out dudes that just get into all this kind of crazy shit and make the most of their situation. Like, you know, a good like 70% of this film is just them looking for grass, and usually it's right in front of their faces and stuff, and they maybe just too high to tell, I don't know. But like, you know, that scene when they first meet and he's in the corner smoking that big ass joint, and then you got like everybody knows that person that is like, oh yeah, I'm the expert smoker, and then they're on their ass after like a couple of hits and shit, and just, you know, him trying to eat all those fucking drugs when they get pulled over, you know, all stopping on the you know, it's just, and then the court sequence where they steal the judge's water, but it's actually fucking vodka, man. You know, it's like they're just endless, you know, and they're just every fucking gag takes them to the next fucking gag. It's all like, this is a very original concept, because before Up in Smoke, you didn't really have a whole lot of stoner comedies, mostly just in the 70s. Most stoner cinema anyways was, you know, the fucking propaganda bullshit like Reefer Madness that we got in the 30s. It wasn't until like the late 60s that they actually started making serious stoner films, you know, stuff like Roger Corman's The Trip and Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider. And then, you know, you evolved to shit like Cisco Pike and fucking, you know, there's a few others. But Up in Smoke was like the first real stoner comedy. And, you know, it's a buddy comedy, not too different from like the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, you know, just a little, you know, with a lot more drugs and, you know, a tad bit more sex. But, you know, the shit is just, and then the supporting characters too, you know, you got fucking Tom Skerritt is Strawberry, that fucking whacked out Vietnam vet that's a cousin of fucking Cheech Marin's, and like they're going to try to score some grass, and that dude's all having a Vietnam flashback and stuff, going crazy, and it's just endless fucking laughs, because then there's a whole bunch of drugs back at his place, and it's like endless fucking, you know, it's one of the greatest duos of all time, you know. And then, you know, Stacy Keach is that fucking narco cop that's fucking codename Hard Hat, Lard ass. Dude, it's just fucking endless, this fucking movie. And it's only like an hour and 25 minutes. And there's no dead space. There's nothing. Everything leak, because they end up in Mexico. And then they're trying to get back into the States. They end up smuggling a whole van made of marijuana. And like they're all looking for weed. And everybody's getting fucking high off this van because they're in the fucking desert. And the thing's like fucking burning. And then, then that ending though is great because what that truly does, for a film that, and it's very realistic on like how much of a calamity it is, just or how much of a calamity it was to just score some fucking grass and shit, and how that could easily turn into a fucking comedy shit show in and of itself. But that ending really captures the true like power of marijuana, that magical herb and shit, because somebody like they tow the van and it's like parked right in front of the venue where they're having the battle of the bands, and somebody lights a match and the fucking van is on fire, and then all the weed smoke gets into the ventilation of the Roxy where they're having the battle of the bands, and then they're fucking it up at the beginning, but then the weed not only like chills the audience out, burgers and pizza come out and everybody's eating and happy with the fucking munchies and shit, and then like it just hits like Cheech and everybody and Chong comes, they all come together and they rock the fucking house and end up with record deal and all this shit, and then they ride off into the sun with one of the another great gags that would get used several times, where you drop the fucking like roach, he's got some kind of fucking hash on a goddamn paper clip and shit, they're trying to smoke and it goes in between his legs and it's all burning and shit, and just like, this is a fucking classic. This is a, whether you're a fucking stoner or a square or whatever the fuck, all the shit in between, you can enjoy this movie because it's fucking hilarious, And in case in point, the next one we go to, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. This is a very hard decision. We got to get to the nitty and the picky, because like Jay and Silent Bob is a culmination of everything that Kevin Smith had done up to that point. This duo, ended up becoming the stoner icons of the 90s, and then here in 2001 we're able to wrap it up. Kevin Smith just wanted to make a bullshit movie that couldn't be controversial in any way like his previous two films, Chasing Amy and Dogma, but in a way he's able to tackle subjects that he really wants to talk about through this just silly ass stoner comedy that's predominantly made up of dick and fart jokes, but it's also a really great satire on Miramax. The whole call to action for them is they're making a Blunt Man and Chronic movie, the comic that they're the basis of, and they're going to go stop the movie from getting made because people are talking shit on the internet. Oh wow. And this was at the start of all this shit. This was like Kevin Smith making fun of this shit before it became like the epidemic that it is. How ironic, somebody talking shit on the internet, talking shit about people talking shit on the internet. That's some Inception level bullshit right there. But the thing of it is, though, he's not just making fun of that shit. He's making fun of like Miramax, the fucking studio that made him, because he was like the unofficial historian of Miramax. So he's able to like satirize this shit and do a bunch of inside jokes, like you got fucking Ben Affleck and Matt Damon making Good Will Hunting 2 hunting season. A lot of great jokes, especially if you know all the history behind like, all the actors that are in this movie. A lot of fourth wall breaking, he gets that, I believe, from like John Landis, who like really made that a big thing in a lot of his movies, and of course a huge inspiration for Kevin Smith's body of work. But the thing about Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, there's some really, really great moments. There are moments in this movie that have you laughing your fucking ass off. Like Chris Rock is so incredible in this fucking movie doing his little Spike Lee impression and shit. And, like just fucking Shannon Elizabeth, it is fucking criminal how this woman didn't get more work. She's a brilliant fucking actor. How she makes it believable that this kind of woman would want to would easily fall in love with a guy like Jay is just fucking brilliant. Either that or just Kevin Smith's that good of a fucking director, And definitely a great writer because his dialogue is fucking incredible. And he throws these little quirky scenarios in because like George Carlin's great in it, and Tracy Morgan's great in it. And mind you, they're only in it for like one scene apiece, but you remember those scenes almost more than most of it, and like Jay and Silent Bob themselves like navigate through this shit show. They've got Will Ferrell chasing him, playing the same character that like he would play for like a good decade. He makes it work. Ain't hating, do your thing, dog. But it's all like kind of the same pastiche shit. Judd Nelson's really great in it. He's doing a little like fucking parody of a fucking country ass sheriff and shit, But there's a lot of references to other movies and shit, like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars, and of course, there's gonna be Jaws reference here and there and shit, Planet of the Apes, fucking just all over the board. You know, even like shit is modern at that time, contemporary is like Dawson's Creek and American Pie. You know, like Kevin Smith is definitely a guy that has his finger on like everything pop culture and shit, and of course comic books too, is because that was the time when like comic book movies were beginning to become a thing. You know, with like the success of X-Men and all this shit, and of course a comic book nerd is gonna be like, you know, really wanting to fucking talk shit about like how they fuck up the material in the movies and shit. But you know, like I said, there's a lot of fucking quotable lines in this movie too. Like, you know, the whole fucking, you know, those some really nice cheese fries and you know, like all of Chris Rock shit fucking hilarious, and the fucking devil and angel shit, you know. But like I said, a lot of that shit is taken from other movies. So that's, as much as I love Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, it kind of pains me a little bit to make this decision. But like, you know, one's got to win. You know, as much as I'd love to do a draw, give a point to everybody, that to me seems unfair. There ain't no participation trophies in the 70s versus the 90s. You know, so I got to give it to Up in Smoke because that movie is a motherfucking classic, not just of stoner cinema, but of comedy movies. Do, you know, buddy comedy movies, that, you know, movies that aren't even stoner films like Bill and Ted and Dumb and Dumber, they even owe a lot to Up in Smoke, as well as like the stoner comedies like even like How High, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and you know, all the other shit, the Harold and Kumar specifically, you know. But the thing about it is though, like Up in Smoke plays better as an actual movie. The way they get out of their consequences are a little more believable and a lot more funny. You know, watching Stacy Keach get an aneurysm just because a couple of guys pissed on his leg accidentally, fucking hilarious. You know, with the fucking big ass joint and then that falls in the nun's car and shit. And it's the way they're just able to get away. You know, just they're fucking dumb and they're able to elude all these people that are so called smarter than them. That doesn't scream Dumb and Dumber. I don't know what it is. You just take the weed out of Cheech and Chong, you get dumb motherfuckers, I guess. You know, at least they got an excuse. If you're smoking weed and you're a dumb motherfucker, at least you got an excuse. You shouldn't blame it on the weed, but you can always blame it on the fucking weed at least. And so, for anybody keeping score, that's 52-45. The 70s are up by 7. Like I said, the 90s look like the 90s were coming back for a while, but the 70s, man, they may be dormant for a while, but they come back. You know, it's fucking, I wouldn't say it's entirely neck and neck because that lead grows. The lead continues to grow. But let's see if in subsequent rounds, if they can fucking see the 90s take it back again. But this is definitely a roller coaster ride. And, you know, but when you got matchups like this, it's kind of fun. You know, it almost isn't like it's work anymore. It's like you can just sit back and enjoy great fucking cinema, you know. But like I said, it all comes down to what makes the better movie. You know, it's original. I mean, great fucking music too. You know, it's just fucking brilliant. Like I said, very hard decision. Wish it could be a draw, but 70s win this round, 52-45. 70s up by 7. Stay tuned because I'm only gonna keep doing this.